The crystal chandeliers above me shimmered like stars, but they only illuminated my humiliation. I was 52, wife of Robert Sterling, the man being celebrated as the city's newest billionaire. For 2 decades, I had been his silent partner, reviewing contracts at midnight, hosting dinners that sealed million-dollar deals, sacrificing my own ambitions to build his empire. Yet that night at his coronation party, I was reduced to nothing more than a punchline. I could feel the whispers before I heard them. Conversations paused when I walked by, eyes flickered with pity, and then the words sliced through the air. "There's the frigid wife who can't satisfy him." My blood froze. Then came the smirk of his young assistant Vanessa, draped in a scarlet dress, telling me this event was for key stakeholders only. I reminded her that I owned 17% of Sterling Enterprises. She corrected me with mock sympathy. Had. And then, in front of 200 guests, she ordered security to remove me, calling me a useless woman. I looked at Robert, my husband, my partner of 23 years. He turned his back. The marble steps outside the hotel felt colder than a grave. In my clutch, I held a velvet box with the bracelet I had planned to give Robert, a symbol of the beach where he had proposed. I dropped it. The coordinates of our love scattered on concrete, just like everything else we had built. But instead of collapsing, I felt something sharper rising inside me. Not grief, not desperation, steel. That night, in the silence of my Tesla, I called my financial advisor. I ordered him to liquidate my $17 million stake in Sterling Enterprises. I froze all joint accounts, canceled every trip, every reservation, every carefully crafted illusion of us. For years, Robert had erased me from his company's history, painted himself as the sole visionary. But I had the documents, the signatures, the guarantees. I had proof that his empire had been built on my sacrifices. And now I was taking it all back. By dawn, Robert's frantic calls filled my phone, dozens, then 50, then more. His empire trembled the moment I pulled my hand away, because I had been its foundation all along. The woman they called a useless wife was about to become the storm that stripped their empire to the bone. The phone rang until the sound became meaningless. By the time the sun broke through the curtains of my quiet penthouse suite, I had silenced every notification. Robert's name blinked like a siren I refused to answer. For years, I had rushed to pick up his calls, whether it was midnight during a deal in Singapore or dawn before a board meeting. I had trained myself to be his shadow, anticipating needs before he even voiced them. But that morning, as my coffee steamed gently on the balcony and the city stretched itself awake below me, I realized something simple, yet seismic. I owed him nothing. The headlines arrived by noon. Sterling Enterprises shares plunge. Amid sudden stakeholder exit. Mystery investor pulls millions, leaving Sterling. Scrambling. I read them with a strange detachment, as though the woman described in those articles was someone else, some ghost version of me who had finally learned how to haunt. I had always imagined revenge would feel fiery, intoxicating, a blaze of satisfaction. Instead, it was cool, deliberate, like slipping into a dress tailored perfectly to my skin. Robert's lawyer called next. His voice was calm but clipped, asking if I had perhaps acted in haste, if I might consider negotiating, if we could minimize the panic. I almost laughed. Panic was the point. Tell him I said that everything I built I am reclaiming. Then I hung up before he could remind me that wives were supposed to forgive. By evening, my sister Claire arrived. She had watched me shrink over the years into the shadow of Robert's empire, had begged me countless times to leave him. She found me sipping wine with the trading tickers glowing red on the television screen. "You really did it," she whispered, awe and fear mingling in her voice. I nodded, the weight of years pressing out of my lungs. "They called me useless," I said. "I'm just showing them what useless looks like." The next day, Vanessa made the mistake of showing up at my door. She carried a bouquet of lilies, Robert's favorite, not mine, and a smile polished to perfection. She spoke sweetly, saying Robert wanted to meet to clear the air. She hinted at misunderstandings and emotions running high. I studied her carefully, the girl who thought my life was her inheritance. Tell him I replied that the air has never been clearer. I closed the door before her smile could falter. Meanwhile, my financial advisor confirmed the news. The accounts were secure, the transfers irreversible. Robert's empire was bleeding, and the markets smelled blood. Investors were calling for answers, board members questioning his control. I had been the quiet foundation beneath his throne. Now, with one decisive cut, I had reminded the world how fragile a kingdom can be when it forgets the queen who built it. And yet, beneath the thrill, there was grief, old grief, raw and aching. At night, I lay awake remembering the man who once held me on a sunlit beach promising forever. I remembered the years we laughed together, built dreams together, raised glasses to victories we thought were ours. I mourned him, the husband I had lost long before the empire replaced me. But mourning did not mean surrender. It meant finally setting the grave marker on what had already died. Robert had underestimated me, and now he would learn. The woman they mocked as a useless wife had rewritten the story, and I was only on the first page. The following week unfolded like a storm creeping over the horizon, quiet, at first, then impossible to ignore. Sterling Enterprises tried to plaster over the cracks, releasing statements about temporary restructuring and minor shareholder adjustments. But the markets were not fooled. Analysts dissected every sentence, every stumble Robert made on camera, and by Friday headlines screamed what he feared most: Sterling Empire shaken by internal betrayal. They called it betrayal. I called it balance. Robert finally showed up at my door, not with flowers or apologies, but with rage poorly disguised as charm. He wore the same navy suit I had ironed countless times in the past, though it hung loose now as if power itself had begun slipping from his shoulders. "You've made your point," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But you're destroying both of us. Don't you see?" I looked at him steadily, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of his voice. "Both of us," I repeated. "No, Robert, just you. You destroyed us a long time ago. I'm only removing the mask." His face darkened, his control cracking. He spoke of loyalty, of duty, of the decades I owed him. Each word was another reminder of how little he had valued me, except as a resource to be mined, a shadow to be hidden. When he finally left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame, I realized something had shifted. He was no longer the man with the upper hand. He was the man standing outside begging for access to a world he had locked me out of. The media frenzy grew. Photos of Vanessa leaving his penthouse surfaced, her scarlet dress now infamous. Gossip columns speculated about affairs, about mistresses, about the young woman who had sneered at me with such confidence. She had become the symbol of his arrogance, and the world devoured it hungrily. I didn't need to say a word. Silence painted the story better than I ever could. But behind the spectacle, I was working quietly. With my advisor, I began redirecting my assets not just into safe accounts, but into ventures I believed in. Women-led startups, scholarship funds for young girls who had been told they were less than housing projects for single mothers, clawing their way out of shadows like the one I had lived in. Every dollar I pulled from Robert's empire became a seed in soil he had long poisoned. Claire noticed the change in me. Over dinner, she leaned across the table, studying me with a softness that made my chest ache. "You're glowing," she said. I laughed bitterly at first, then realized she was right. For years, my reflection had been dimmed by Robert's shadow, my worth measured by his approval. Now, with each step I took away from him, light returned. Still, there were moments that hurt more than I admitted. Late at night, I would remember his hand resting over mine on a steering wheel, the quiet intimacy of two people moving through the world as one. I would remember how safe I once felt in his arms. Those memories haunted me, tainted now like photographs singed at the edges. Love had lived there once, and it had died slowly, painfully, until all that was left was ash. The turning point came when I received an invitation not from Robert, but from Sterling Enterprises' board. They wanted to meet with me privately. At first, I thought it was some cruel trick, a way to humiliate me further. But when I arrived at the skyscraper, I had once walked through with pride, they treated me not as a discarded wife, but as a power player. They asked questions Robert never thought to ask me about my role in the company's early days, about the deals I had quietly structured, about the vision I had once offered, and he had claimed as his own. For the first time in decades, they saw me, and I let them. As I walked out of that meeting past the glass walls reflecting a city I had once thought too big for me, I felt a truth settle deep in my bones. Robert may have tried to erase me, but the world was starting to write me back into the story. The boardroom smelled of leather and desperation the day Robert finally lost his grip. Word spread quickly that a motion of no confidence had been called, and though he fought to keep his smile in place, sweat betrayed him, darkening the collar of his shirt. I sat in the back, invited this time not as his wife, not as an accessory, but as a witness. Perhaps even as an heir to the throne he thought untouchable. The men and women who once fawned over him now shifted in their seats, their voices clipped and sharp. They asked about missing funds, about reckless investments, about the assistant in scarlet who had suddenly vanished from public view. Each question cut away at his authority, until all that remained was a shell of the man who once lorded his power over me. When the vote came, the silence was deafening. Robert Sterling was removed as CEO of Sterling Enterprises. He stormed past me as he left, his eyes burning with fury and something darker, fear. For a heartbeat I almost pitied him, almost. But then I remembered the night he let them call me useless, the years of dismissing my sacrifices, the way he had erased me from his story. Pity was a luxury he had never granted me. In the days that followed, the empire shifted. Interim leaders were appointed, lawsuits mounted, and journalists dug deeper into the rot that had been festering under Robert's reign. Through it all, I remained calm. The woman they had once ignored, once humiliated, once stripped of dignity, was now untouchable. Investors reached out to me privately, curious about the ventures I had begun funding. They wanted in. They saw not a discarded wife, but a woman who had weathered betrayal and risen sharper, wiser, unafraid. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the city bleed into dusk, Robert appeared below. He didn't call up, didn't shout. He simply stood there, a man stripped of armor, staring up at the woman he could no longer reach. My heart twisted, but I did not move. He had chosen this distance long ago when he turned his back on me. Now he was only standing where he had always been, outside my life, begging for entry. I turned away, back into the warmth of my apartment where fresh plans waited on my desk. Scholarship programs, business proposals, a foundation in my own name. Every choice now was mine. For decades, my existence had been measured in what I gave up for Robert's dream. But now my life was finally my own canvas, and I intended to paint it in colors he could never imagine. The last call I took from him came days later. His voice was hollow, stripped of arrogance. Why, he asked simply, as though he still didn't understand. I closed my eyes, let the silence hang between us, then answered with the truth that had lived in me all along. Because you made me believe I was nothing, and I needed you to see what nothing looks like without me. I hung up my hands, steady, my breath even. For the first time in my life, I felt free. So, to anyone listening now, know this: betrayal cuts deep, but it doesn't define you. Family can wound, love can sour, trust can shatter, but from those ruins, you can build something greater than you ever imagined. You can turn humiliation into power, pain into purpose. If my story touched you, I ask you to share it. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Tell me if you've ever risen from someone else's betrayal, if you've ever found strength in the ashes. Because sometimes our survival is the story that saves someone else.